Mario Kart 64 was the quintessential kart racer in the 90s. I'm willing to bet that anybody playing games back then had so much fun racing against their friends and also kicking butt in the battle modes. But what I'm definitely sure you weren't thinking when you were playing this game back then is what's actually going on in the background of this game. Like, what do the 3D models of this game look like? They would also have been quite unaware that what's actually happening on screen is very technically impressive for 1996. In fact, I'd maybe argue it's still pretty technically impressive now. So let's have a deeper look into Mario Kart 64 in a way that you've never seen it before. Welcome to Low Poly. The very first thing we have to understand about Mario Kart 64 is that it was made with the ROM cartridge format in mind. The fact that you have 8 different karts, 4 players, and 16 tracks all available at once is thanks to the way the ROM prepares and preloads the image data. All the character animations and voice samples, everything to do with the game can be accessed in real time from the ROM. And then there's the frame rate where Mario Kart 64 is constantly drawing new frames at 30 frames a second. This can only really be achieved with cartridges. And therein lies the biggest problem. Cartridges can only really store so much. So to alleviate the problem of character models taking up way too much memory on a cartridge, what they did was take a similar approach to what they had in Super Mario Kart for the SNES. That is to say that in fact they used sprites for the character models. The idea for this episode of Low Poly came about because curiously I wondered what exactly am I looking at when I'm playing Mario Kart 64? Well, wonder no more, because this is exactly what you're looking at when you're playing the game. You're in fact looking at character sprites textured onto a flat 2D plane. But it's only when we look at the game in this way that we can understand just how the game actually functions. Most of the sprites in this game, that includes characters and even trees, all look directly at the camera. As you can see with Bowser here, the plane that he's textured on is pointed at a weird angle. The flat plane mesh that the characters are textured on always orientate themselves just in the right way so they're directly facing the game's camera. You'll notice with Mario Kart 64 that the game's camera is always in a fixed position. What I mean by that is the camera never goes up or down, it always stays at the same height. The visual director for this game, Tadashi Sugiyama, states that this is actually an artistic choice so that people just casually viewing the game would know that it was Mario Kart. However, if you really think about it, this is actually a design limitation. After all, the game can only store so many sprites on a cartridge. Now the reason the sprites look so good in this game and the animation's rotation looks so smooth is because they used a similar technique to another game we've already discussed in this series, and that is Donkey Kong Country. Using a higher polygon model of the same character, they would get sprites by rotating and animating this model, and then begin formatting those pre-rendered images by limiting the colors and the size to fit on an N64 cartridge. Also, it cannot be a coincidence that this turnaround you're actually seeing right now is 64 frames. I refuse to believe they didn't set out for this to be 64 frames. I don't believe in coincidences. These sprites would then be textured onto this model, which is an 8-try model of a flat plane. It honestly couldn't get any more basic than that. You'd then basically double the try count by adding a drop shadow underneath a character just to finish the effect off. Which means every playable character in Mario Kart 64 is very low poly at exactly 16 tries. Now they say necessity is the mother of invention, and I definitely see some techniques in this game that hold that very true. Sprites take up very little memory, and so do 2D planes. But here's where Nintendo's technical mastery comes into place, because now what they do is program these very low poly models to always be facing the camera. And in doing this on a very blurry 90s CRT would never actually destroy the illusion that these aren't 3D models and in fact are just 2D sprites. I mean, now we know very differently, and now I've explained to you exactly what's going on here, now the illusion is completely broken, but it's still amazing to think about. Now the actual kart races are not the only instance where severely low poly models were used. Another technique we can see is when an object is far in the distance, it is in fact just a 2D plane in a textured way similar to the rest of the kart races. And then when you get a little bit closer, that 2D plane pops into a 3D model which has decidedly higher poly count, well, comparatively anyway. And a great example of this is the hot air balloon in Luigi's Circuit. And if we do a turnaround of these models, you can see exactly what I mean by very low poly versus still kinda low poly, but with more definition, I guess. The lowest poly version of the hot air balloon is 15 tries, while the highest poly version, I guess, is 100 tries. And this is great resource management. You don't want those extra tries bugging down your game and slowing the frame rate. And honestly, before I started making this episode, I actually didn't know that. I never even noticed that that change takes place. Games are made by wizards, I'm sure of it. Obviously, we've come a long way since 1996 and Mario Kart 64. Mario Kart 8 has very high poly models which look beautiful actually. Now, I would love to go more in depth with Mario Kart 64. It's one of my favorite N64 classics. People really wanted low poly to come back, and this idea just piqued my curiosity. I had to make it and show you guys Mario Kart 64 in a way that you've really never seen before. But if you guys would want an in-depth breakdown of every track in Mario Kart, that's something we can definitely do. But that's it for this episode, guys. If you have any other ideas of things you'd really want to see in development terms of low poly models in games, please hit me up at A+Start Show on Twitter and we'll discuss some things. And it kind of goes without saying, normal episodes will resume if this one does really well. But there you have it, guys. That's Mario Kart 64 models in low poly. Thanks for watching.